Okay, back to biblical worldview development, creating classroom conversations, helping the students to see how the pieces of life fit into the context of the whole. I'm going to now give you some examples, and in these examples, you're going to be exposed to alternative ways of using the planner. And you'll see what I mean after we look at this. Karen, if you could get the lights. This is an interview I did of a teacher at a school in Gig Harbor, Washington, Lighthouse Christian School. I did consulting there for 3 or 4 years, if you can imagine. So by the time we were through, everybody got it. And this is an interview with one of the teachers who did a conversation starter on the topic of snails. Hello, my name is Christian Overman, and I am here today with Kim Tarr. Today we're going to be talking about a lesson that you gave to second graders on the subject of snails.
How do snails show the Creator? My next step was to find Bible verses to back that, so that I could read the Bible verses to the kids, and we talked about each box.
Okay, and under humanity, what did you put?
How can we find real joy in snails?
Interesting. And then under the area of moral order?
What is best about snails? What's the best?
Fascinating question. I can imagine what the kids came up with here in your conversation. And then in the area of purpose?
What purpose does God see in a snail?
And finally, the area of God.
How do you think God feels about snails?
The thing that I appreciate about the conversation starter is that as a tool for helping a teacher to be biblically integrative, there's a nice balance here. You're not always headed towards moral order, or you're not always headed towards creation, but you're getting in the humanity element and the purpose. And I like the balance here. So you prepared ahead of time. You weren't just winging this, right?
No, and that's the key, I think, is to find your questions and to find the Bible verses that back the questions ahead of time. So you have a bigger, broader concept for the whole lesson.
Okay. So you used this tool as a preparation tool. And then what happened when you taught the lesson? What was the process you went through?
So what I did is I divided the kids into 5 groups, and each group was in charge of one box. So what happened is we went over on the document camera. I went over the verses and over the questions. And then I had the groups break up, and they wrote their answers to that question on a big butcher piece of paper.
Each group then was working simultaneously in their table, so to speak.
Yes.
And they were talking to one another, but
Yes.
you had told them, okay, this group over here is going to talk about what do you think God feels, how do you think God feels about snails? And
Yes.
so they were talking about that as a group, while this other group's talking about what joy can we find in snails.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I told them they could answer, they had to discuss amongst themselves, and then they could write their answers. They could also draw pictures to go with the little box.
So they're all in their little groups, and they're thinking, they're talking, they're writing down ideas, and then what happened?
Then after the time was up, each group got to get up and share, and they really, really enjoyed that. One was appointed the speaker for this situation, and they were able to speak and explain their chart, and they were so excited about it that they wanted to hang them around the room. They were like, can we hang our charts up? So we hung each chart up around the room, and they were very proud of them.
Oh, that's great. And how long did the charts stay up on the walls?
They stayed up for probably a month.
Really? Did you have any parent visitors that came in and said, what's that?
They were like, oh, wow, snails. A lot of people don't really think about snails. I personally have always loved snails, and that's so.
Oh, I see.
It was it was neat.
But Kim, I think this points out the fact that there is not a single academic topic that you couldn't contextualize. I like to use the word contextualize, putting that subject into the context of this bigger picture of reality. Now, obviously, that's not exercise you do with a high school class, exactly like that. But if you use your creativity, you could think of alternative methods that would pull them in. The whole idea is to get them sharing their connections between your subject matter and the bigger picture of the whole, the biblical worldview. In these 5 components, I think it's very important. The biblical worldview is a gigantic elephant to eat. And so if you break it down to those 5 components and you have your students focus in on those 5 components, either as a whole or as groups, you might get more mileage for. And then I think there's also a principle here that I think we tend to remember things that we think we thought of ourselves. And when you think, oh yeah, the lights go off, oh yeah, there's a connection there. And you think, oh, I thought of that myself, write it down. They feel better about it. And I think they might remember it longer too, rather than Kevin just downloading, hey, don't forget this, kids, giving them a lecture on the biblical worldview of anatomy. Although you can do that too. I'm not saying you shouldn't, Kevin, but there are times when you can think of creative ways for them to come up with the connections. Wow. Okay, here's another example from the same teacher, and this was a different way to use the tool. Karen, if you could get the lights. This was she used the tool in connection with a study they did on Helen Keller. Okay, and that's the backdrop of this one. There was another occasion where you used the conversation starter with your kids. You were doing a study on Annie Sullivan, I believe, right? How is it that you decided to use the conversation starter for this lesson? What prompted you to think this might work well?
Well, we do not see a lot of blind people. The children haven't been exposed to that. And so I wanted them to think from God's perspective.
Yes. And I have actually a copy of one of the conversation starters that one of the students did. And I gather on this lesson, you actually handed out the physical conversation starter, and you had them write in answers to these boxes, correct?
Yes, each child had their very own in this case, and they were able to decorate them afterwards.
Great. You looked through your list of possible questions and you selected one question for each component that you felt would generate some conversation.
Yes.
So tell us what you picked for the God box, and let's walk around here.
How do you think God feels about Annie Sullivan? Once again, I was using the questions for integration that were available for me. And I just looked through the questions, and that's the one I chose for this lesson. How do you think God feels about Annie Sullivan?
Yes, and the creation box, what did you put there?
I had, after God created the world, he said it was good. What is still good about being blind in this fallen world? Wow.
That's a remarkable question. And again, are these second graders?
They are second graders, and this was an amazing lesson, I have to admit.
Well,
so deeply, and it was just very, very, very good.
So they connected to these questions.
They did.
And what did you put down in the humanity area?
What were Annie Sullivan's positive character qualities?
Beautiful question. Yeah. And in the moral order area?
How could teaching a blind and deaf child be done in a God-honoring way?
Wow. Let's talk about that a minute. What did they come up with on that one?
They said that they could teach sign language with patience.
Yes.
They wrote, be calm and don't get mad.
Good point.
Keep trying. If it's hard, if they don't understand some of the language, keep trying.
That's a great question. And by the way, it's a question they would never get in the state school.
No.
I mean, all of these questions, they would never get there. Yeah, because that's off limits. Now, what you're doing is you're really peeling the onion, as I say, going down deep and saying, let's grab hold of God's view of all of this. I love it. How about the area of purpose?
How did Annie Sullivan give Helen Keller more purpose in her life?
So how long did this lesson take?
This took, they broke into groups, and then each group shared a little bit, and then we wrote together their box.
Okay.
So each group had their scriptures. They were talking about it. They were able to share. So this was like a 2-day lesson. I divided the class into groups, and each group had a servant leader, a scribe, and a presenter. And then the other two in the group were there to help, give the information. So for example, one group was assigned the God box. And that question, how do you think God feels about Annie Sullivan? Then they had the scriptures. So the leader read the scriptures. The kids were writing their ideas. Then they presented the ideas. And then the next day we took that and we wrote it. Everybody wrote the same major components in that box.
Gotcha. Is there anything else you want to say about the Annie Sullivan lesson before we wrap this up?
Just it gave such a deep understanding of God's point of view of both the teacher and the student in that case. And it was just delving so deep, deeper than I would have thought that second graders could go.
Yeah.
I was very impressed.
That's great.
With their level of thinking skills.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Kim, for sharing this with us. Okay. Does that give you some creative ideas as to how you might use this in your classroom? In other words, it's not simply you asking questions and getting input from a group, although that's good. But it's creative ways to get the group to chew on it together. Now, one of the things that she did, and I think it works well, is to have them break them up into smaller groups, because it's a lot easier for you to talk. Like, for example, what we've done here, it's easier for you to talk to your neighbor than to the whole group, and kids are the same way. So anything you can do to break down those barriers and get them talking. This is talk time, it's conversational. Get them jotting down their ideas, and then pull it all together and get them to share with the full group. You might get a lot more mileage that way. Any comments on either one of those short videos? Anything going on in your mind as to how this might apply, or ideas that you could do at in your class? Yes.
I like how this kind of allows them to think empathetically about not just their experience, but the experience of what other things do in the world related to them and also not related to them. Because I think it builds empathy, like just that understanding of something deeper than themselves.
Yeah. You're a deep thinker, I'll tell you that right now. Anybody else? Yes, Karen?
She also obviously had taught them how to go deeper, because there were the question and then there were 3 bullets, not just one. Usually kids would just give one quick answer and then they're done. I
mean, and those, if you look carefully at it, they were higher level thinking skills that you'd think that most second graders are capable of. Anybody else? Yes.
I think it's kind of nice to have those open-ended questions, because critical thinking is a skill that we've noticed at the elementary level that's kind of lacking, and it's kind of nice to have giving kids a safe space where we can keep pointing back to God and the absolute truth that we can rely on with the Bible.
Yes, and to talk about it as a group without fear, And I've had teachers tell me, wow, the students came up with ideas that I never thought of. That's a common response I get from teachers. I said, wow, that's indicative of things going on inside of them that even the teacher may be unaware of. And it's a wonderful thing. Okay, Brianna.
I'm really excited about the concept of this structure being used at the introduction of a unit.
Yes.
I have to conceptualize now how I can integrate that with 4 classrooms, because I would have multiple classes. So I love the concept of having them in groups and having like each person or each group, small group, work on these facets and then bring it all together, maybe even display it during the entire portion of the unit as like a visual reminder while we're getting deeper into material. Right. But in having multiple classrooms, just me practically thinking about how can I honor each class's work and having it up there.
Yes.
The wheels are turning.
The wheels are turning. That's exactly what needs to happen, yes.
The other thing I noticed about these questions is they're, like was said before, they're very open-ended. Yeah. And in my own classroom, I like to ask a lot of open-ended questions, because sometimes kids are so worked up about the right answer, and the
Right.
Bible often has the right answer in their brain, and so I think this allows them to look at it from a kind of a multi-perspective.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Now, the question comes up, what if they share an idea that's not biblical? And which can happen. Yeah, anybody can. And, but for the most part, I think in a Christian school where you have Bible doctrinal, you have a Bible class here? Yeah, okay. You're teaching the Bible to them. They're getting conceptual ideas right from the book, okay? And the idea is that they will carry that, what they learn in that class, over to all the other classes as well. So there's a bridge here.
I'd like to add that I think it would be really encouraging still to see students speaking things that might be contrary to the Bible, just to facilitate
Totally.
conversation more,
Totally.
and also that the students are comfortable enough to express themselves.
Yep.
Or as we, as Christians, know like the biblical correct interpretation of things.
Yep.
Still, it's a part of their learning. How do they hold space to have tough conversations?
Yep.
Holding space for peers to be able
To talk about it, and then to have other peers engage in that conversation as well. You're not always the answer person at the front. This is how you should think. But you're going to find that your students will give input for other students in this journey they're on, and to think biblically about all of life. And don't be afraid of it. Just let it happen. And yes, okay, one.
For me, for preschoolers,
Yes.
5 and under, I think this format is really good, wherein they talk to each other or they give their own answers and I write them down. They learn from each other
They do.
because they have different environments,
Right.
family dynamics and all that. So they will be learning from someone. And if they answer in a non-biblical way, that is our chance to integrate
Sure.
the lesson of the deeper meaning of
Sure.
their understanding.
And their understanding is
Yeah.
being shaped. I mean, they're in preschool, okay? So they're shaping their concept of who God is, and it's a teaching opportunity for you.
Exactly.
Yeah. I want you, and this will take a little bit of time, pick out the question. Now, let me say too, on this list of questions, that we didn't try to write down every possible question, of course. It would be, scores of pages long. We're just trying to get the juices going. So if you think of a great question that's not on that piece of paper, you use it. The paper is just to get the juices going. So if you want to adapt it, feel free. But come up with a good question that you think will prompt conversation in your classroom for each of the 5 areas. Go. And then you're going to share your work with your neighbor. Could we give just a couple examples?
So my topic was student engagement, let the children talk.
Yep.
I said, why do you think student engagement is really important to God?
Good question.
And I answered it with, because Jesus said, let the children come to me. And then I took
Biblical
this here,
truth
the
statement.
101 biblical
Yep.
premises, and
Yep.
then I used some of these God columns to answer the questions. Like,
Yes.
God desires relationship with everyone. God's aware and interested in every child's life, and
Yep.
God loves all children.
Fantastic. Love it. Very good. I like the way you used the 101 biblical truths to help you to come up with ideas for how to answer your own question. Where did the 101 truths document come from? Well, I was invited to do consulting at a Christian school in Puyallup, Cascade Christian Schools, and the superintendent, Don Johnson, invited me to come and work with the staff on integration. And we both thought I'd be there for 3 years. I came down to the school. They gave me an office there, and I came down twice a week. So it was not a quick and easy deal. I mean, we really peeled the onion deeply. I was there for 8 years. And we talked with the teachers about biblical worldview, how to integrate, quote unquote, into the subject matter. But some of the teachers weren't totally crystal clear on what we meant by biblical worldview specifically. And so we put together 101 truth statements in this format. And when we passed that out to them, bingo, the lights went on. They said, oh, okay, now I know specifically what you mean by a biblical worldview. These are the 101 truth statements that you feel, as an administrator, are important to embed or to plant into the heads of our kids. Now, that school had many, many different Christian denominations, like I think this school does. I mean, it had dozens. And so we didn't get myopic about this. We stuck with the big picture items on this list that we felt all of the denominational representatives there as parents would feel fine about. Now, for your school, there may be a very important premise that we didn't include in this. You can adapt it. You know, make your own adaptations. Make it 105. And if you don't like something we put in, cross it out, you know. Okay, can you see how this tool might be useful for a family around the dinner table? Discussing events, you know, things they saw in the news, okay? I mean, anything could be put in the center. Now, you don't always have to formally sit down and fill out this piece of paper. I think that goes without saying. It's a way of thinking, you know. But around the table, if you want to talk about a certain thing, you can pull questions in to ask your kids and see what happens. All right. We did the conversation starter. The next tool we want to focus on is called the Awesome Activator. And for that, the objective is to design ways your students can bring meaning and purpose to any activity. I want to stop there. I said bring meaning and purpose to an activity because I heard someone once say, and I think it's true, that we don't find meaning in our work so much as we bring meaning to our work. And there's a difference there. And we want to teach our students how to bring meaning to whatever work they're doing. So it's not just a quote-unquote menial task, but they're actually seeing that task in the context of a bigger picture, which we'll talk about. If you look in your packet and get that tool out, now, take out this tool. This is called 99 Truths about work, economics, and human flourishing. Now, take out this one, questions for contextualizing activities. Now, this is different than contextualizing ideas or concepts. The differences are subtle sometimes, but there is a difference. Questions for contextualizing activities. All right, we're going to watch another video which relates to work. And the question I want to ask you is, what's the best gift that you can give a student? Well, I don't know if the best is the right terminology here, but what's one really good gift that you can give to a student? And this is answered. This is a 5-minute video that will kind of set the tone for what we're going to talk about here.
If people can't see what God is doing, they stumble all over themselves. And this includes our students. Without meaning and purpose, many just get by, and some not even that. When it comes to school, there's no shortage of what to learn. The shortage is why. For many students, it's meaning that's missing, deep meaning, the kind of meaning that motivates, beyond grades, future paychecks, and accolades. I know what you're thinking. That would require a revolution. But the good news is, this revolution is not far off. Where do all revolutions begin? They start with ideas, and not just any ideas, but passionate dreams that move people to action. In 1517, Martin Luther nailed his dream to a church door and started a revolution that changed history. Luther denounced the sacred-secular divide that elevated the work of clergy to God's work and relegated the work of milkmaids to something less. He declared that milking cows is God's work too. Puritans carried the Protestant work ethic to the New World, where it fueled the development of a nation with the idea that a man's shop and his chapel are both holy ground. But over time, the sacred-secular divide returned. Today, it's the pastors and the missionaries who do God's work, not foremen or flight attendants. We've quit believing that God does His work through carpenters, cops, and CEOs. And how many of our students aspire to do God's work tomorrow as urban developers and homemakers? Do our students know that they were created with a purpose in mind when God said, "Let them rule over all the earth"? Do our students see their work as something God wants done, ruling over electricity, sound waves, and language, computers, wind, ruling over money and muscles, as well as ideas? Imagine what would happen to any nation where citizens engaged in their work, whether artisan or doctor or geek, as the very work of God. What if the office were a place to apply one's faith? It would turn the world upside down, again.
Reflections on that? Thoughts? What came to mind?
I once had somebody tell me, don't teach kids, like ask them, what do you want to do when you get older? Ask them, what problem do you want to solve? And I feel like we just need to add, as Christian educators, as ambassadors of Christ on the end of that.
Yes.
You know, as ambassadors of Christ, what problem do you want to solve?
Yes, good point. Thank you, Lisa. I was teaching at a conference of Christian educators about 10 years ago, 15 years ago in Seattle. In the breakout session, there were about 25 teachers and administrators from different schools. And I can't even remember the topic I was discussing, but I do remember this, that a question came to my mind spontaneously, which I hadn't planned to ask. And the question was, what is the purpose of education? And in the back of my head, I had a certain answer that I was looking for, and so I didn't pause very long. I answered it immediately myself. I said, the purpose of education is to equip the next generation to rule well over this material world. And when I said that, the air went out of the room. I could have heard a pin drop. And I just stood there myself. And then, up in the front row, this teacher, she said quietly, "Would you mind repeating that?" And I did. Purpose of education is to equip the next generation to rule well over this material world. And then I said, "Has anyone heard that before?" And out of the 25, there were 0. I don't remember a single teacher telling me that the reason I'm getting educated is so that I can rule well over this material world. Now, some of you might be thinking, wow, where do you get that? Well, again, I go back to that first commission that we read earlier in Genesis, where God defines our job description, generally speaking, as human beings. He spells it out right there in the first chapter. It's our assignment, is to govern over this material world, not just the animals, but the material world, including the resources in it, according to the Amplified. I never got that. I never got that until I was probably in my 40s. And I would encourage you, if you're convinced that this is true, think about sharing it with your kids, not just once. We are God's deputies on assignment. We have an assignment here, all of us. The psalmist reiterated it in Psalm 8, 3-6. When I considered your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon, the stars, which you set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them, or human beings that you care for them? You have made them a little lower than the angels, and you've crowned them with glory and honor. You made them rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under their feet. It's also in Hebrews. But let me dissect this statement a little more. I said to equip the next generation to rule well over this material world. When a lot of people hear that word rule, they think of political rule. And I'm just saying that's not the whole of it. Here is an elementary school girl ruling over bed sheets, correct? Is she not? And pillows? Yeah. She's ruling over that part of the material world that is right in front of her every day. This girl is ruling over eggs, milk, and mushrooms, correct? She's governing well over that. Hopefully. She's learning how to. This guy is ruling well over numbers. And he's being taught how to do that in school. What's the reason he's being taught how to rule well over numbers? Because he can use that to rule well, in some regard, over this material world. And to fulfill that job description that God gave him in the very beginning. The other thing I want to underscore is the word well. And there's a lot in that word well. It means being motivated by a love for God and for people. That's what I mean by well. So the first commandment is embedded into this purpose statement very, very deeply, okay? Our purpose is to rule well over what God has put before us right now, which is the material world. And to rule well is to do it in obedience to God's word. That's a big point. And with virtue, with humility, with wisdom, and etc. So there's a huge amount of stuff packed into that word well, especially from a Christian perspective. So the Awesome Activator is built on this concept. It's built on the idea of ruling well over the material world. Now, what you want to do is to put an activity or a project, not just, you don't want to put in just a cognitive idea here. That's for the other one. Anything that has to do with physical or mental work. Okay, work can be mental as well as physical. Could someone from the group read that for us out loud?
Number 1, think of an activity, project, or task you're going to do. Write this activity inside the bubble shown in the center of the box below. This activity may be as simple as washing dishes, or as big as creating a new computer software program.
Number 2.
Brainstorm specific ways in which your activity relates to the bigger picture of life as given in Scripture. To prompt ideas, you may want to refer to the 99 Truths About Work, Economics, and Human Flourishing, and Questions for Contextualizing Work.
Number 3.
Narrow down your key ideas to 5 or 6 thoughts that particularly speak to you. Write these ideas in new bubbles around your activity below.
4.
On the next page, write down specific ways you could apply your ideas to your work. Ask God for help. think outside the box, talk it over with someone.
Yeah, I really like the talk it over with someone there, because you're engaging with others about, hey, how does this connect with the bigger picture, okay? And number 5.
Think about any preparation you may need to do in order to be successful, any training you need to have, any research you need to do, any changes to be made. Write these things down in the skills I must develop section on the next page.
Number 6.
Write down action steps you will take. Be specific. Give yourself some time deadlines.
Good, thank you. The sample that I'm going to show you is washing dishes, and I wanted a sample that we can all relate to. I assume that you still wash dishes. So the first task is go through and check every of these 99 work truths that relate to washing dishes. I think one of the key points here is intentionality. That what this does is it brings the whole project up to the intentionality of the mind, where you're conscious about making these connecting points. And to be specific about those connecting points, and that there are dozens of connecting points that, if you think about it, you could apply. Now take out your questions for contextualizing activities. Share with your neighbor which one you selected under each one and why it resonated with you. Now, you've gone through a process so far to get to this point, and you've thought about it, you've discussed it with somebody else like we just did, and you're talking about it with your neighbor, your spouse, and then you come up with this.
Okay, I am to love my neighbor as myself, and this includes my family members.
God wants His will to be done on earth, including dishes to be cleaned, and He works through people like me to accomplish it.
I have been given gifts and abilities by God for the purpose of blessing and serving others. I am to do all work heartily as for the Lord.
The material world, including dishes, water, and soap, is a realm God has commissioned me to govern over.
I am to love the Lord my God with all my strength.
There you go. On the back, here are some ways that I could apply biblical truths. Well, I could wash dishes as an act of loving service to my family. And it could be a direct expression of my love for those who are closest to me. It could be. All right. I could wash dishes as an act of service to God Himself in fulfillment of His commission for me to govern over all the earth, including water, soap, cups, and plates. Then you want to write down some things you need to do in order to succeed at that. This is your prep work. And for washing dishes, it could be this. Well, I must be convinced that dishwashing is the will of God for me, and that He wants His will to be done on earth as it is in heaven through me in this way. Now, that's a mental adjustment. It's a switch that needs to go on. You need to be convinced that this is just not an exercise, physical exercise. It's much more. I must be conscious of the fact that when I am washing dishes, I am doing work that God wants done. Okay? That's a mental adjustment. And I must keep in mind that I am washing the dishes as though Jesus were going to eat off those plates. Wow, that's a mental adjustment. So in this case, those skill adjustments are all mental switches that need to be made. I must fully realize that I am loving and serving God and others through washing dishes. Finally, here's the action steps. Okay, I will put a little sign up near my sink that reads, "Here I directly serve God, love others, and fulfill my role of governing over the material world." I will use my dishwashing time as a time of practical discipleship. Okay, putting my faith to work in a very real and practical way. I will wash dishes regularly and consistently as unto the Lord in a timely and organized fashion. So that's that person's action plan. That's how it works. Now, if we could catch the lights, I want to show you here a video clip of two teachers who were using the Awesome Activator. I am showing this to you to prompt ideas as to how you might want to use this. I spent 3 or 4 years consulting this school, Isaac Newton Christian Academy in Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Well, I used the Awesome Activator for a project that the students do to research their own family ancestry. We do it as part of a history unit on the last half of the 1800s, specifically focusing on the immigration influx that happened during that time. They had to individually pick some biblical truths, connect those in the little word web with the project. So when you think about a family relating together, this student wrote, "I can help other people in my family when they have sad or mad emotions or celebrate when they're happy." One more that I really liked was the truth, "Everything good comes from God." So that includes you and your family.
Great.
I really appreciate the Awesome Activator because without it, a lot of assignments can seem purely academic. Some kids don't connect with a certain topic or a subject, and the Awesome Activator always gives each individual child a way to connect. They see the bigger picture. They see God's purpose, and it gives kids more motivation. They seem more excited about it. They seem more interested, and even if they're not super interested in it, definitely more willing and understanding the purpose of it.
What I hear you describing here is a way to help to bring greater meaning to the work that they are actually doing.
Absolutely. And a part of the rest of the Awesome Activator is talking about what skills you are going to need to learn and actions you're going to take. Developing their writing ability and developing their ability to speak in front of people is something that God wants them to learn.
Mrs. Greer, let's talk a little bit about your experience then. Tell us how you use the Awesome Activator.
We were studying Africa. They already had completed a chapter on Egypt and ancient times in Africa. This current chapter was on modern day Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And we do a project where the kids take an African country and they design their own webpage. To give this project meaning, I started it with the Awesome Activator. We did it as a group, and I prepared an Awesome Activator on my own the weekend before presenting it, coming up with the ideas that I was hoping that they would come up with just as a base to start. And they blew me away. I was so excited when I sat down with them. We filled the whiteboard. They found all of their own ideas, which included mine, and then some. We discussed this probably for 40 minutes. They were into it and they were enjoying it and they were excited, and it just became contagious across the room. It was fun.
How does this exercise, how do these exercises help shape their view of work?
I think both of our activities require a lot of work, a lot of research, a lot of digging for facts, and in your case, digging for family history. Right. It's not something that's done in a day or an hour. It's something that our project has lasted about 2.5 weeks. We're still wrapping it up this week, actually.
Yeah, ours will take a month.
But it's about an attitude toward this work. It was, you give them a project where there's lots of research or there's lots of writing. That's work.
Yeah, that's it. You mean you're actually making your kids work? What
I know. But if you start with this, their attitude toward the work changes. It's not, another project.
Why do you think that is? What's going on in their heads? Why are they coming alive here.
I think they see the connection. I think they see that what they're doing is pleasing and honoring to God. And when they understand that, hey, this is not just an activity, this is something I can do that's going to please God, their attitude changes. The meaning behind it changes. And it's not about, oh, this is hard work. It's about, wow, this is great work I can do for God.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I mean, it brings it out of the classroom into a much bigger picture here, as we always say. I think that's very, very significant.
Mm-hmm. It's the thing that I've loved about this theology of work study from the beginning. It's changed my personal life and how I approach coming into the classroom every day and how I approach going home to my kitchen. And so I share that with the students too. And we talk about it in brief ways throughout the day when I help to remind them that they're not just sitting in a desk, going through motions, doing what someone tells them to do. They are part of a bigger picture. Their lives are part of a big purpose that God has for them. And everything they do, God has a purpose for, and they can either do it for God's purpose and for God's glory, or they're doing it, or they're doing what they want to do, and they're doing something for themselves, and then they're not fitting into God's kingdom, God's purpose. And as soon as you put it in that context, they're with you.
And I take it that when you say that this has had a personal effect on your thinking, that you're actually thinking that way too when you're doing the laundry.
It's really changed my life in general. My purpose in everything that I do and my relationship with the Lord has changed as I think about the theology of how I do everything I do.
I think it has a lot to do with intentionality, doesn't it? You know, you're actually bringing these things to the conscious level, making those awesome activator connections, so to speak, between that activity and the purposes of God behind doing laundry or whatever it is.
We have a rigorous academic program here, but all that rigor has to point towards something, and our students need to see that it has meaning and relevance, that we're not just pushing them to work hard for no reason.
Yes.
And they're beginning to understand that we're helping them to be prepared for God's kingdom, to be used by God in whatever purpose that he calls them for.
Yes.
So they're reacting to that, and they're seeing the meaning of that. And we hear from the parents how glad they are. They recognize what was going on in our classrooms without us really talking about it much. Parents began to notice that things were different, and they began to notice that their children were coming home with new skills. And so they came to us and said, what is going on that has caused these kinds of conversations that we're hearing in our home? So we had to do a better job of communicating to them what we were doing here so they could understand it better.